Hello, hello, everybody. Welcome to our second chat discussion here, all about ChatGPT from proposal industry experts. We're so glad to see you today here on our LinkedIn Live. I'll be honest with you, I thought I hit the button a second ago, and we've been talking for about 2 minutes about ChatGPT just behind the scenes. So it's really great to see y'all here for our very professional presentation that we have for you. I'm so excited. We have Ben Klein, who's also a co-founder of Pi, and then a big-time machine learning expert and top-notch GPT presenter, Michele Atkinson, joining us from Cavalry Consulting. A little bit of housekeeping. If you have comments, questions, words of wisdom, we definitely want them in the comments. We are happy to bring them forward to our experts to have these conversations. So please don't be shy. I'm already monitoring the comments, seeing Javier is here. It's great to see everybody. Don't be shy. Put your comments there and we will bring them up on screen. And so without any further conversation, and now that we are actually live, I'll kick it off to Ben Klein to get us started.
All right. Thanks so much, Kathryn. Michele, we've talked for a little while, and I'm always so impressed with Cavalry Consulting. You are always so innovative. You have one of the best onboarding programs for proposal managers. You do something super innovative with SME interviews and technology. I think that's great. And then now I'm hearing that you've been kind of ahead of the curve on AI writers and the current kind of ChatGPT that we're involved in right now. So maybe if you could just give the audience a little bit of your background, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. This whole thing with ChatGPT is really exciting to me because it's been a few years now, but I've been writing proposals for a very long time, and I've always seen the possibilities with AI, working especially a lot with government contractors and the technology that they use. I became involved with a lot of companies that were doing these R&D contracts. Seeing what AI was opening doors to, I thought, why can't we do this with language? Why can't we do this with words? Not being somebody who was so involved with the research of how the brain works, and this is what the researchers that have been creating this technology have been doing for so long. But I started going down this path of how do we create this technology. And in 2019, I actually won an AFWorks phase 1 cyber contract for my own company to create an AI ML dual use technology on building a tool that would take contract data for the Air Force and simplify the contracting process for those contracting officers, because they're basically using templates over and over again. So if you think about how we have all of this information you're seeing in ChatGPT, hopefully a lot of folks have been able to, play with it, see what's possible, summarize information, retrieve information. I knew that was possible. We were early. COVID made everything really tricky. But this is really exciting to me because I know that it will happen, especially with everything I've learned through that process and everybody that I met. So hopefully I can provide some insights from what I've learned then and then what I'm starting to see now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's very interesting. I mean, here at Pi, we are in general very tech positive. Of course, we always have a caution because the concerns around like diversity or inclusion that are very fundamental to us. But I'm curious. So have you had a chance to start using ChatGPT in like a real context, not just a practice context, or?
Yeah, actually, I have. So I have an example of one way that we used it. I've used it several times in the last few weeks. A lot of it is figuring things out, really understanding the prompt engineering process. And one of the things that I want, we'll come back to this a few times, I'm sure, throughout this discussion. Sure. But one really good example of using it in a proposal I'll start with was just this past week. So we had a proposal that was due, on a tight deadline. I'm sure everybody is familiar with this. Our client was going to be driving it up to where it was due. It was actually a physical proposal in California. And with all of the weather there, they wanted to make sure they got it there in time. Yeah. I had asked permission to mention their name. Usually we don't talk about our clients, but they had agreed that it was okay. And I want to mention them because you had talked about diversity and equity and inclusion. And this is such a great example because This proposal was for training on diversity, equity, inclusion. It was a government proposal for that, and this company is the gentleman that I was working with. His name is Dr. Vic Baker, and he was telling me, as we're talking about AI, about a talk he does about the bias in AI.
Oh wow, we're going straight
conversations about that. Then 5 minutes later, we're dealing with this very last resume that we hadn't gotten yet in the proposal. And we're going, okay, we got to get this printed. We need this resume. So as I'm sharing my screen, because I believe that if, as a consultant, especially if I'm going to be using ChatGPT, I need to be transparent about it. I'm not going to be claiming any of this content as my own writing. I'm going to use it to save time for my clients and therefore reduce the time of their invoices, reduce the cost of their invoices. I'm sharing my screen. We're going through edits and we realize there's one resume we haven't gotten the information from. So what we did was I went to LinkedIn. I said, I bet I can find this person on LinkedIn. So I found their profile. Sure enough, there she was. I took it, I exported it into a PDF, which you can do. I copy pasted the whole thing and I put it into the text edit on my Mac. And then I removed all the formatting. So I had everything that came out of her resume in text edit and I pasted it in ChatGPT.
Yeah.
And then I wrote in the prompt, I said, act as a proposal writer who is submitting a proposal on training for implicit bias.
Yeah.
The requirements for this resume must include, and then I listed some of the requirements.
Yeah.
And essentially what it did, and I said the resume needs to be in the third person and her bio was all written in the first person. Yeah. And it took what she had and it turned it around so it was written in the third person and it addressed the specific points that I had added.
That's fantastic. What an amazing use case. I love it.
So after our conversation about bias, we turned around and we looked at, and he says, wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
And we had to clean it up a little bit. It was not perfect, but I put it in we had the template ready to go with all the blanks of what we needed. Mm-hmm. We were able to put her education in there. And all we needed was, one piece of contact information that we couldn't get from LinkedIn. And it was.
Yeah. I love it, Michele. That's amazing. How did you even think of that?
I mean, when you're desperate.
I know in most of my clients, we keep a library, honestly, of resumes, but there are times when we do not alter resumes because we're just too lazy or we run out of time to get them to fit rich requirements. But what a fantastic way to just store data. And you wouldn't even have to in this case. Like now you're looking at almost library-less content. If you have access to their LinkedIn profile, you probably have enough to write their resume straight from that. That's fantastic.
Oh, Ben, are you implying that we should get rid of content libraries?
Oh, you know I hate
Ooh, there's a whole conversation there. But it's okay. So if somebody automatically updates, if they update their LinkedIn, then all you have to do is go grab it from another source and pop it into ChatGPT, and ta-da, you have something that looks beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
10 for 10. Yeah. Oh, Mike Barella has given you a nice little comment. He says, "Brilliant problem solving, Michele. So good job."
I would imagine that you could also, if let's say that the education or things like that aren't written in the format that you wanted, mm-hmm. you could probably ask it to put it into a format that you want. And so in federal proposals, for example, we use some specific sources that tell you, here's how you would write, PhD or Masters of X and all of these things. And you can copy that straight out of the PDF and paste it in there and say, convert these into the format above. Mm-hmm. And it would take all of those and convert them into that format instead of you going through and changing all of the references to the education type of thing.
You know what? I suspect you could even get the AI writer to do some research for you. Like if you needed to know, like, how does this person add value to this project? You could give a prompt like, hey, here are the requirements that they're concerned about. And can you look at their education and see if there's like any matches? And it would probably like run down that search for you. That's fantastic. I love this idea. I can't wait to try it in my own business. This is great.
Yes, that's something that I really wanted to also hit on is doing that background research, because one thing as a consultant, you work with a lot of different companies. So you might not always be an expert in the type of work that they're doing, but you have to be able to add value by kind of filling in the blanks, especially when you're writing technical information, and sometimes it's hard to get a hold of people. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I used to do quite a bit was I would Google or watch YouTube videos or figure out how something is built. For example, I learned how you pave a highway with like different layers of asphalt and the coarse materials and the base materials and all of these things. I had to understand how that all worked so I could essentially provide a draft to our subject matter expert who was way too busy to talk to me and say, is this how you would do this? Because I read the specs. Mm-hmm. I think this is what you're going to do, right? And you wouldn't do it during the day, right? And then let them read it and edit it. But I was just going off of different PDFs that I found from conferences and things like that. But I would say that with ChatGPT, you could say, I need to pave a highway using this method or within this many days. And mm-hmm. you do that a whole lot faster. I haven't had a chance to explore that, but that's something that I want to incorporate into, as you were talking about, our onboarding process, because that's some of the trickiest things to train on is here's how you read specifications, and then here's how you turn around and write to them. And when I say that, just for the audience, I'm not claiming to be an engineer. I do not know how to read specifications and then write to them like an engineer, but I can give somebody something to read. And then usually the SMEs will say, not quite right. And they're more willing to modify something that's.
Yeah. You know what? I can see this use case right away, and I'll give you a specific example. So I was hired to work on the Nico Mine project up north in Canada. And the RFP was around getting power to the very bottom of the mine, which turns out a very difficult problem to solve, right? Like, you need a lot of generation power at the bottom, and you are trying to deliver it in like sub-zero temperatures where like they're not going to have access to the site for like 6 months of the year or 3 months of the year or something like that. And there was just a lot of complexity there. And I had to read through document after document after document to like make sure, because we had 6 partners submitting to the bid, and each one of them brought their own individual insight to the project. But like I had to make the executive summaries, or I had to like review the executive summaries and come up with like specific talking points that would be relevant to the mining company, right? And so I read so much, and honestly, I can see your use case where like I could incorporate those documents or even the websites of the participating partners and kind of come away with like some correlation that would have like provided sort of the language that they needed, and also my own understanding, so that I could like read through the article and understand. That's fantastic. Again, another great use case from Michele.
I think one of the biggest issues is that many of our proposal teams, we have the ability to understand how to write a proposal, right? But the technical experts will look at us and just be like, well, this isn't correct, right? Imagine being able to have having an instant reputation boost. That's what that says to me, is that you come across as much more professional, you come across as much more knowledgeable, and you instantly get the trust of your SMEs by just doing a little bit more research with this system instead of having to go through weeks of training. 10 for 10. I'm so glad you brought this up, and that's not a use case I would ever have thought of.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And another thing is that it will take, and so, I'm again going back to some of the government sides of this, but we have the Federal Acquisition Regulation, the FAR, which is the longest and most boring set of clauses that you've ever seen. And a lot of folks want nothing to do with it. And you're reading the RFP and it's referring you to 52 this and 23 this and 12 this. But just for fun, when I was in ChatGPT the other day, I grabbed an entire section on the small business standards, and I told it to, okay. Oh, hang on, pause. I have a use case for you guys that a lot you may not have heard of.
Go ahead. I'm ready. I'm ready.
But this ties into what I was just talking about, because this is what I did with it. Take one of your blog posts, take something you wrote on LinkedIn, take a paragraph or two, something you wrote for fun, put it into ChatGPT and say, tell me the tone of this writing.
Mm-hmm.
And it will tell you the tone of this writing. So for mine, it said, this tone is positive and enthusiastic. It uses analogies. It is persuasive. It provides technical details to make complex topics simple.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it described my writing. And then I went to a new window in ChatGPT and I pasted the entire thing of the small business section of the FAR. And I said, summarize this in this tone. And I pasted the way that I write.
Okay.
So you don't even have to use Grammarly or any of those tools anymore. You can just have it generate for you. You don't have to check later.
I mean, it wrote, well, here's the thing. Here's what happened. It told me that I used analogies because in the post that I used, I had a couple analogies in there. So it used an analogy every other sentence, and it was really annoying.
This is when AI pattern finding kind of bites you. Yeah.
Yeah. So then I came back and I said, use less analogies, you know, because, and then you can give it maybe a different example and skip the analogies altogether. But the key is that the prompt, you might think you're asking it for something, but it's only as good as the words that you give it. And so that's why I was experimenting with act as a proposal writer who is responding to an RFP with these requirements. Because otherwise you might be saying, take this and compare it to this, and it's going to give you a completely different output. So we're almost doing experiments. We're testing a hypothesis. We're trying one prompt and seeing what we get. We're trying another prompt and seeing what we get. Yeah. And I get, sometimes I see these posts on LinkedIn and people will say, I tried ChatGPT, it's neat hype, it's not another ChatGPT post, I promise. And I'm kind of blown away that it's getting brushed off so quickly, because it's like, you probably tried a few prompts and you didn't get a very good result, but it's there. Yeah. But it requires this understanding that this is a tool that is based off of hundreds of billions of pieces of text and data, and it is creating something entirely new. And you have to use your input, your understanding of the language model to get the result that you want.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you talk about that. So going back to kind of your, hey, I want to go through and I want to make this all similar. So humorously, I've been hired for the Dominican Republic, and I'm actually not part of the main proposal group. I'm sort of like a red to gold review. Like my goal, because they have 12 partners, a consortium bidding on this project, there's a lot of different inputs, and they're all supposed to be working on their areas in like silos and then bringing it all together. And I supposedly am in that group bringing it together. And so I'm very excited about the possibility of being able to use ChatGPT to like one voice it in some ways, like to like bring all that content together, to symbolize it. I've had similar issues on Partner where like partners are introducing themselves inside the proposal, and like, someone like Siemens will like write 2 succinct paragraphs, and then Oracle will come along and like give me 13 pages of their business, and I'm like, thanks. Like I have to make these like each other, right? So I'm really looking forward to saving my time by using an AI writer to do that. And I hear you about the prompts, because as we presented in the last ChatGPT session, it really was that there were a lot of times where ChatGPT like came back to me and said, I can't do this for you. But if I changed the question subtly, it was like, actually, I can do this for you, right? Like I'm going to do it in a slightly different way. And it's interesting. You just said, write like a proposal writer. And so I'm curious, because of course that means that somewhere out there in ChatGPT's data set, it's like, I know what a proposal writer is. And I'm curious like if we even if we queried it on that, what it actually thinks a proposal writer is, because I would love to have that definition, because I know a lot of companies don't.
Ben, why don't you pull it up and we'll present, like, pull it up on ChatGPT right now, and we'll ask it.
The real question is, can I get into ChatGPT?
I have asked it a lot of questions about proposal writers, the roles in proposals, and it's pretty darn good.
Wow.
So I've gone real deep on that.
Michele, I want to circle back while Ben, if you're able to do that, that would be super cool. If we could take a look and see, like, what does it think a proposal writer does? But what I'm thinking of, Michele, I'm transported back to, like, my 8th grade library science days, when we used to use card catalogs, and I'm dating myself a little bit here, but we used to use card catalogs, and then all of a sudden along came Google. And now this seems like a similar inflection point, right? Where it's like, okay, what is our role? Our role now, you know, we have this kind of heavily search-based role at many jobs. Like, if you're a coder, if you're a writer, whatever it is, you use search a lot. And I'm curious whether or not, as proposal writers, we're going to make a switch from being writers to being askers, like, as our job. Is that too bold, or do you think that has potential?
I think that we will never stop writing, because I'm working on a few proposals right now where I'm like, man, I got stuff to do. I don't want to sit here and put new text on this page, but there's nothing I can ask for that is going to give me what I need. At least in all of the ways that I can think about using this as it is, I need to put some really specific stuff down. And until you can take a form that was given to me in a really ugly format that just doesn't work and make it so I can format it beautifully all at once, even with my expert level understanding of styles and all of that stuff, they're still not nice. But that's a side note.
That's fair.
Yes. So but with all of that, I don't think that we're going to stop. I do want to mention, kind of as an aside with that, is that I have asked it some of these questions, it meaning ChatGPT. One of the questions that I asked it was if there's use cases for the government evaluating RFPs using AI. And then I followed up, could they write new RFPs using AI, because there's so much data already from past RFPs? And granted, remember how it works, it's predicting the next word based on the previous words. But the interesting thing that I wanted to share, you guys can ask this question too, so I'm not going to read you the answer. But the interesting part that I wanted to share was, I asked, would it understand how to appropriately use shall and may to indicate when something is required or just suggested? Because this goes back to that writing part. And it said, an AI model could be trained to understand the meaning and usage of words like shall and may in the context of RFPs and other legal documents, as well as the legal implications of their use. However, it is important to note that AI is not capable of understanding the legal nuances and the complex meaning behind them. Even though it can recognize the words and understand their definition, it may not be able to understand how they are used in a legal context or the consequences of using them in a specific way.
So they're covering themselves a little bit there. Yeah. Okay. That's spectacular to understand what the future of this looks like. What we're going to do real quick is we're going to pop over to Louise's question here, and then we'll talk about what a proposal writer's style looks like, because I think Ben and I were able to pull that up in the playground. So Louise asks, do you need to let clients know that you're using ChatGPT?
It's a very good question. If you are dealing with private information that is not publicly sensitive, I would shy away from it unless you have control of your AI writer instance. In a case where you are talking about publicly available information, I suspect the answer is it's fine. But like at the end of the day, so again, I don't know how everyone runs their consulting practice. I have, unfortunately, time and materials contracts, which are horrible, because it means that there's an incentive for the buyer to like push down the amount of time that I use, and there's an incentive for me to grow the amount of time that I use. So I try to work on a project standard instead. And if I can harness a tool like ChatGPT to make my writing more effective so that I have more time to like deal with nuances in their situation, I think that's all the better for that client. But I would, you're right. Like there is some sensitivity there that you need to be aware of. We had that conversation again in the last one where we talked about like, do you need to cite your sources when using ChatGPT? And it's tough because GPT won't always be able to find your sources unless you go through another tool. So yeah.
Is there a risk here? I just want to follow that up real quick. Is there a risk that if you put proprietary stuff into ChatGPT, that now it's out there in the world? Michele, I see you nodding.
Yeah. So this is something where there's a difference between OpenAI's GPT-3 and ChatGPT, which, not to get too technical with it, but if you are building a tool, an API, there is another version that is separate from ChatGPT, which is what we're talking about, what everybody is seeing. And I see a comment here kind of about this light version.
That's what Javier was exactly describing that in the comments, just as you said that.
Anything that you put in there can be, and it says right there in the FAQ, anything that you put in there, it can be reviewed by their human trainers. And it goes back into the model to improve the model, because ideally, part of those things are both stated on there, and also it states that it goes back into the model, but it's separated from your personally identifiable information. But also think about it, the words are considered like tokens, and it's all context. It's not like they're saying, hey, this company is doing this thing and they're relating it back to you. It's just data points. But consider it as a way. I personally think that, they know that there's things like bias in this. They released it to millions of people. And now if millions of people are able to provide feedback on some of these answers, it could actually improve what is in there, because the information being provided is going back into the model. So I don't think that it's a bad thing. If you have a paid account and you're building apps and then you're putting your information in there, like you're loading it up and you're fine tuning it, which is a whole separate thing. And you need people who understand Python and all of that to do it, because I've explored that too. Then you can opt out of having your data going back into the model. So that's a separate thing. But anything that you type into that box, you are basically saying it's fair game and they can look at it.
That's really important. I don't know that a lot of folks realize that. And I think we had some comments prior to the session actually starting that was kind of curious about how, that ownership of data and how that information works. So very important caution to folks who are using this. If you're putting proprietary information in there, you don't necessarily want to divulge your company's secrets to ChatGPT. You would want something that is specifically designed for your organization. Got it. Okay. And before we pop over into what is a proposal manager's writing style, which we've pinned in the brain. But Nikki has a really great question here too. Do you think as this gains more popularity, are they going to start discouraging it? I'm curious if anybody would even be able to tell.
Sure they will. Like, if you read the content right now at present, there are ways, there are nuances. And I again, going back to our last session where I asked it to write an executive summary. And as a writer, what it did is it gave me the definition of an executive summary, and then it started writing the executive summary. So like there is a misunderstanding of like what actual writing is that maybe will be overcome with time. I'm sure it will be. But like there will be tools. Like the thing is, once ChatGPT works, there'll be tools that will like be able to like review its writing, right? Like there's a big crisis in education right now where they're like, okay, well, how are we going to detect plagiarism when ChatGPT can like write under the 10% or 15% threshold that'll trigger a plagiarism tool, right? So something else is going to come along. Someone's going to create that software, which will detect that thing. So, but like, Kathryn, do you remember like 5 years ago, I think there were a bunch of like federal and municipal contracts that came out and said, please don't use content to answer our questions. Like there was that kind of like brief flurry where like where they were a bunch of these things where they said like, please don't use a response tool to respond to us, basically.
Like, yeah, and now 76% of the industry or whatever is using RFPIO and Loopio. Like,
yeah, and then we went ahead and did it anyways. And
what are they going to do?
There were no consequences. So my suspicion is it's possible that companies will ask for this, but like at the end of the day, we are just trying to deliver good messaging so that their procurement team can make a logical and valued decision, right? And if a tool helps us get there, I suspect that there's going to be some people who are upset about it, but long term, I think people will just accept it. Sorry, and that was me rambling for a long time. Michelle, you have any thoughts? Or?
Well, I honestly think, well, first of all, there are tools already to detect it. People came out with those like 3 days after ChatGPT came out. I fiddled with one of them. I took 2 paragraphs that I took straight out of ChatGPT and put it in there, and one of them rated high and one of them rated low. So that was kind of interesting. But one thing that I will mention is that there are, the people that are putting out the RFPs, the owners and the agencies, they can benefit greatly from using this tool in their own processes. Mm-hmm. And so you also have to think about that side of it, is that if they can use this to go through their past RFPs to create an RFP that is maybe, for example, we've all seen it where maybe in the requirements they ask for one thing, but in the evaluation criteria, they mix it all up. And they can use that to make these more cohesive, to reduce protests and having to reissue things, because nobody wants to waste all of their time. They want to go home at the end of the day. They don't, they don't like to read the proposals either. So I imagine that there are already tools being developed now to help them, which would then, everybody also, entrepreneurs, they like money. So they're thinking about ways, and I'm going back to, where I was, a couple years ago, knowing this was possible. It's going to end up being something dual use where they can evaluate it in the middle, and it's going to be able to say this person is more compliant, and they're going to put it through, and they're going to summarize companies A's proposal has an outstanding in this technical factor, and company B's proposal has a satisfactory in this technical factor. And we're going to have to learn how to write that way. And that's where I see this going. And so really this discussion has to be, what are those things that can happen? And that's kind of a...
Yeah. I would love it if we could get to the point where a procurement team could be like, hey, I have a steering committee of 8 people. They're going to have this variety of skills, like everything from like someone who pays the bills to like the executive to an operations person to the communications person, et cetera. And then says, please design a proposal for us that like and like the format under which the other team has to submit back to us, that like all of us can understand and read, or like what sections we could read on. Like that would be, the long-term dream for me.
Wait. Okay. So if you know who's on your decision committee, can you say, I want to write this for somebody who has an engineering degree? I want to write this towards somebody who has a business degree. Like, is that, like, you could tailor your content on the front end? Am I being too precocious with that, or is that possible?
I'm sure it is. Javier, of course, like jumps right in. Of course, he's like, no doubt AI is having its own race on the procurement side. I'm sure it is. Like, I'm sure that Ariba and Bid Periscope and all those other guys are trying to figure out, like, how do we make this easier for you to create a fantastic proposal? And they could probably like, hey, based on the Harvard Business Review like guidelines on how to design a proposal, and here's my internal steering committee, and here's the decision that we need, and here's our main concerns, like write this up for us. And that would be a beautiful thing, because I'm dealing with a proposal right now where it's clear they designed it pre-COVID, and then somewhere along the line they dusted it off and like are resubmitting it again, and they've just like the additional stuff that they've added post-COVID has like kind of muddled. Like, I'm like, I don't know how to respond to this. Like, I think I'm up to 97 clarification questions on this bid, and I'm just like, that's, if you have 13 people bidding on this, like that's got to be a nightmare for the procurement team.
Wait, Michelle, could agencies use this for their Q&A period too? Like, could they automate their Q&As?
Like, give the Q&A a data set and then
I mean, you would think they should. Here's the thing, is that I've always thought, why is procurement so completely archaic and old-fashioned when we're over here like flying UAVs on the other side of the world on one agency, and the other one is grabbing a Word template, and we can't even communicate to the next contracting office that's, you know, right here. And so that has to change, and it will, because of the amount of money that is flowing through. And so it's a matter of time.
Yeah. I mean, Javier is, listen, Javier and I, it's like we're on the same brainwave here. I keep saying this. I've been saying this for 10 years, that the ideal state of these processes is that computer sells to computer. Mm-hmm. And I hate to be that way, but like, that's the ideal state. That's what we're moving towards. Are we going to get there in the next 20 years? Who knows? But yeah, maybe a little bit futuristic, but we've got to look towards that eventuality, right? Like, because this is one step closer to that happening. Okay, Ben, what did you come up with on what the proposal writer's style is?
Can I share screen? I'm just in.
Yep,
just hit present. I'm in OpenAI's playground, so I'm not in the true ChatGPT, but it'll provide a very similar response.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, just hit present, and you should be able to share your screen.
I love presenting. Now the question is, select window or screen. Oh, this is very exciting. Let's give you the entire screen, and then hope that like no one texts me something nasty right now.
It's all right. I can actually decide whether or not it goes on. There we go. Okay.
All right. So what is a proposal writer? That was what we were curious about, right? And actually, I want to ask it a couple questions to see how far deep it goes into this. So, all right. Yeah. So it's giving me, a nice little summary. Compelling narrative. They also have an understanding of the process of proposal writing, including researching. By the way, and the humorous part is, you see this underlining? Of course, it's my Grammarly going off on it.
So Grammarly and ChatGPT are having
going head to head. But now I'm curious. So what is, because going back to Michele's use case, what is the style of writing a proposal writer should write in? I'm just curious, like if it has a style guide or some sort. So there it is. Yeah, professional, concise, persuasive, clear, concise, easy to understand. Like these are kind of like standard communication norms. The piece that I would get there is persuasive and professional. That's what it's pulling out of somewhere. Everything else is kind of like, yep, this is what a standard writer and what writing communication should look like. Final proposals should make sure that to include supporting evidence such as research, statistics, and case studies. Yeah, so I mean, it's basically pulling from like the how to write.
And I like this professional, concise, and persuasive. So if you can set that definition.
Yeah.
Oh, Michele, you are brilliant. I'm so glad you're here. This is spectacular.
I'm curious though, how much content in a proposal should be original?
Oh, yeah. The computer magic that we're about to submit to here.
Yeah, okay, it's gonna.
It depends.
It's gonna give us the whiffle answer.
It depends.
I mean, ultimately, what we've learned here is it does have an understanding of what a proposal writer is. It is giving us kind of like some basic writing guidelines. So that is the framework under which it's writing. But I'm guessing that I could then tailor that. I want my proposal.
Oh, here, I'll show it again.
Proposal writer style to be written. And who said that they wanted to write at a 12th grade level?
Oh, yeah, that was
12th grade level.
Sarah.
It was Sarah, right?
Yeah.
All right. Can you rewrite the question above, or sorry, the answer above? So above in that level.
Before we go, I've got a couple more use cases.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, let's this is just for fun, and then
we'll come back to this in just a second. Which we are racing up on the end of our time. So Michele, take it away.
Let's switch over.
One thing that you can do is have something turn text into bullets.
Yeah.
Or bullets into text, which is useful if you're doing project sheets or resumes or things like that. Or if you want to come up with something to start out of nowhere. So you could say, can you give me a few examples of accomplishments that an employee would have on their resume? An employee or a project manager, and it will give you a few random examples. You could send that then to the person that you don't know at all and say, have you done any of these things? Or do you have any quantities for these? And you've given them some bullets, and then they can fill those in. Then if you need it in a paragraph, you can give it back to it and say, can you turn these into a paragraph? I need a summary. Or if they give you bullets, you have bullets in their template version, you turn it into a paragraph, etc. You can have, you talked about our onboarding program, and one of the things I'm most excited about is having a way for writers that maybe aren't as familiar with some of these things, especially in the government side, to understand, what is a joint venture? What is, and then be able to, and then you can say, explain what a joint venture is. You were talking about the 12th grade level, at a 5th grade level.
Yeah.
Explain it at a 10th grade level. Because if you get it at 5th grade, it's going to say it's two companies that are working together, kind of like a marriage, and then you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And you can take that and it helps them understand, without me having to stop and go through a whole thing. Okay, we're going to do glossary today. They can stop where they're at and see it, and get it at the level they need.
The onboarding potential here. And we also have Ben Block here saying, I use ChatGPT for a press release quote. The person quoted talks like a robot anyway, so this works great. Yes, imagine if you could just pull from that person's previous speeches or whatever, and then actually, can you write in the style of this person for a press release? You could probably use that for cover letters and saying, can you write in the style of, whoever our CEO is? And do the cover letters. Ben, what a delightful way of thinking about that lines up really closely with what Michele is bringing to us as well. Michele, we have 2 minutes left, and what I would love to do is just turn the floor over to you to make sure that we didn't miss anything. We've talked about resumes, about how to build resumes. We've talked about how to shred RFPs, about how to get better at onboarding. We've talked about how the syntax and how all of this information builds to create a proposal manager style, which we have covered a lot of ground today in 45 minutes. I hope everybody knows, come back and watch this again. But Michele, what's the future look like, and what do you think we're missing in this conversation right now?
I think the future is first of all, ChatGPT, what everybody is seeing, this is the first time that this has been made open source for folks to get a chance to fiddle with. It's important to know that all of the big companies that Microsoft and Google and Meta and all of those, these tools, these big language models, they've been around for a long time. There's research that basically says it's not good enough. We don't want to show it to anyone. And so they've got these standards of what they'll release. And it's doing the same things of what some of this is doing. It's being repetitive. It has bias. And so what we're seeing here is a very small piece of what the potential is. And keep that in mind with what you're seeing, because it's so early that there's so much more coming. You really want to understand what the potential of AI in general is with these language models and how it's going to impact you. Follow ChatGPT on LinkedIn, because they're showing what these APIs and these Chrome extensions that people have created. ChatGPT will teach you how to write code and create an extension. And so there's just a massive amount of new technology being created with it on a daily basis. And so you can see the potential with that. But watch for all of the things that are being created. Really test the prompts. I really just want to encourage everybody to be excited about this. If you're a consultant, I think it's important to share it with your clients. Let them know, because it's all about transparency. And I think that, the clients that we've shared it with are really excited about it. They don't want to have to know how to understand all of these things. And when you start showing that you're an expert in this, they will come to you later for help with their marketing, for help understanding how they can use it in other ways. And so I think that it's really valuable to be fully transparent in your understanding of this when it comes to writing in general.
So hear it from our AI and machine learning expert, Michele. You're definitely going to have to come back on and we'll have more conversations about this. What an absolute delight to have you join us today. Now, if folks want to get a hold of you outside of the PI community or out there in the real world, how do they do
that? You can add me on LinkedIn. I think you can find me through here. You can also find me at cavalryconsulting.com or Michele at cavalryconsulting.com.
Excellent. Well, we'll make sure to get that information into everyone's hands. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. This is revolutionizing our industry. And we're so glad to be able to have these cutting edge conversations with members of our community. Thank you so much for joining us again today, folks. It's been great to see everyone. Stay tuned for probably what's going to turn into a weekly ChatGPT chat. And we'll see you later on. But please don't hesitate to join us at proposalindustryexperts.com, where you can find the hot topics and knowledge that you need to do your job the best possible way that you can today. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time. Cheers, friends.